You are good to go.
Thanks, Bill. Should I jump right into my topic, or do you have like an agenda or?
No, jump right in.
Okay,
You'll,
cool.
you'll turn it
All
over.
right. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about something that we've been working on. It's called Graphman. It's really about configuration management. So why are we working on configuration management today? Really, it comes down to we want to help customers get the most out of their Layer 7 created assets, those policies, those services that they create. There's a very rich configuration data that's deployed at customers. Some customers have thousands of APIs and hundreds of gateways, and through some research we've been doing, it has been identified as a pain point. And so, if you're familiar with RESTman, Graphman is a new API similar to RESTman, and the objectives are to help customers isolate and organize configuration in a way that reflects how they like to organize things in their environment. We want to fit modern configuration pipelines and concepts like configuration as code. And really, this is about modernizing a really foundational building block for us, right? RESTman is used by a number of different things. So yeah, Graphman is this API for managing Layer 7 gateway configuration. It's GraphQL based, so it's very granular if you want to go granular, but it's also it lends itself to bundling configuration. So if you don't want to worry about the details, you don't have to. You don't need to be a GraphQL expert to use this at all. The value add, in addition to RESTman, is it's a JSON format. You as part of implementing this, we're trying to simplify as much as possible the object model of the gateway, so it's more readable, it's less noisy. From a performance perspective, depending on your use case, 10 to 100 times faster. Yeah, it's very flexible. And we also introduced a concept of configuration summaries and checksums that allows you to compare different environments. And it's an assertion, right? Graphman is an assertion, which means that it's backward compatible to older versions of the gateway. So yeah, I'm just going to do a demo for you where I'm going to show you the developer experience when you're using Graphman. We can use command line interface, Postman. I also have Graphical, which is a client that GraphQL developers like to use. We're going to bundle things by dependencies. We're going to bundle things like services, policies, encapsulate assertions, certs, and cluster-wide props, and we're going to go through exploded and flat bundles. So I think we've got a pretty tight group. Feel free to interrupt me along the way if you have any comments or questions. But here's my development environment. I've got a whole bunch of stuff, right? But I've got this one service here that I want to package. So it listens at /VMware/L7/API. There's a policy fragment here that's included. And notice how that policy itself has its own dependency. So there's nesting levels of dependencies in that API. There's an encapsulated assertion. In some of these assertions, some certificates are being referred to, some cluster-wide properties. So I want to create a bundle for this service. Okay, so move on to the Graphman client resource. So you've got some samples here, some utilities to use Graphman. There's a Postman collection here. There's instructions on how to use this, but I'll just jump right in here and I'll use the command line interface. And I'm going to say that I want to query. That's inside utils. I want to query. And I have a sample query here that I'm going to use. So if I go into /sample/queries, service with dependencies, this is really the only thing I would change here, right? This is the resolution path of the service I'm trying to bundle. So it's the part of the query that you would modify based on your use case here. In this case, it's already pointing to the API I was showing you earlier, so /VMware/11/API. So let's run that query, samples, queries. service with dependencies, and I'm just going to save that in my graph response.json. All right. So that should have been created here. Here's my file. Just gonna make this easier to look at. So here's your service that we're looking at policy manager. See how everything is JSON based here. You see the policy, and you've got this concept of all dependencies here, which was part of the query. So you can see the different fragments that have been packaged in here. You can see this. There was an encapsulated configuration in the policy. So it's here. There's a trusted certificate. We can see that, but in one of the configuration in the policy, there was a reference to a certificate, a trusted certificate. So it's packaged here. There's also this cluster property, right? So we've got this JSON response here, this GraphQL response that brings together everything for that service. I just want to create a bundle from that, a flat bundle that I can just treat as configuration as code. So I'm going to say node utils graph response to bundle, and I'm going to pass it that response we just got, my graph response, and I'm going to say, let's save that as my bundle.json. So that just creates a slightly different configuration here where everything is flat. You've got all your cluster properties, all your trusted certificates, right? Everything is a bunch of arrays that you can apply as is. So I could take this bundle file here and save that and I can apply it to a target, and it's going to create all these entities on a target side. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to take a little detour. I'm going to explode the bundle just to show you a different way to represent that. So explode bundle, my bundle. I'm going to run this. And you're going to see here, just get this out of the way. The exploded directory was created. Inside of that, I've got my cluster-wide properties, my encapsulate assertions. You know, if I look at this trusted certificate is packaged here, and I've got a tree here with a JSON object per policy and per service. So basically, we just break down that bundle in separate files, and you can go in and change that, right? So for example, this set foo, you might want to do that, but just to show you that I can say, let's go and put this in /demo/utils, right? So I'm just going to give it a different folder path. I can go into my cluster properties and say, this is the production version that I'm pointing to here. And maybe this encapsulated assertion, I'm going to change the GUI label just because I can show you, right? So I have this configuration as code. Now I want to apply this. So I'm just going to rebundle that. I'm going to implode the bundle, exploded, and I'm going to call this my hacked bundle.json. And that's it. Now I've got my hack bundle.json I can just apply to my target. So I'm going to disconnect and connect to my target gateway here. Right. And what we should see is nothing because I cleaned it earlier. So you only have Graphman here, right? So I want to apply this bundle. Apply bundle, my hack bundle, the JSON, cross your fingers. Here's what was applied. I do a refresh, and you can see this. All this stuff has been deployed. You can see that extra folder here that we specified in the configuration of set foo. Right? If I open that service and I look at this, you can see that little change that we have here. Right? Same thing. If I go into my cluster-wide properties, I've got the production version of that variable here. So yeah, so this is about bundling. There was dependency analysis going in there. Let me just show you maybe with graphical, right? So it's very dynamic, right? So get me all of the services, all the policy fragments, maybe give me the resolution path. Here's an interesting query I was working on before this demo where I'm analyzing our own OTK. As you may be aware, our OTK has like tons of policies and tons of dependencies, right? So I'm curious about, you know, if I go and query this basically endpoint, the OAuth authorization endpoint, I'm just curious, what are all the dependencies for that, right? And this is a big query and it runs somewhere in the lab here, so it's going to take maybe a couple of seconds to go here, but you can see this interesting information you get by analyzing, right? Like all of the dependencies across all of the fragments for the OTK, right? This is what you're depending on. These are all the cluster properties that are used by your authorization endpoint and its dependencies, all the encapsulated assertion configurations, etc. That's it. Any questions? Vincent, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask about. Oh, there's a lot of noise there. Ask about like dynamic references to objects, like if you have gateway dot service name dot whatever. So basically, you can't actually visualize it actually on the code. It has to be in runtime. Is the time that it actually finds that. I guess you still can't do anything with that. So if you reference a cluster-wide property and say, you know, gateway dot service name, and it depends on which service it's actually picking that up as to what that cluster-wide property's name is, I guess that can't handle that.
So I think what you're talking about, Vincent, is a reference or cluster property inside of a policy and being able to dynamically change the variable that you're referencing the policy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it depends. If you pick up API A or API B, then the cluster-wide property will be called whatever dot API A or dot API B dot properties or whatever you want.
Yes. So if you need to, as part of your pipeline, make changes to the policy XML, that's not, I didn't touch any of that right now. So that's not, you know, in the current scope of making changes inside the policy XML itself. You know, we're trying to move forward with use cases where you can isolate those as much as possible. But basically, that's the same as before, right? If you want to make changes in that policy XML, you could. We're looking at
It's not making
different
changes.
approaches.
It's in the code that you actually dynamically reference a cluster-wide property in the code by using the service name, for instance, that
Right.
it was called by. So you know you can
Oh, okay.
by
I
using the
think you're
service name that actually calls it. So if you made a
right.
request, then it depends
I
on the
understand.
request on what service you request as to what the
Yeah.
cluster-wide property is that it's going to look at.
Yeah.
As
You're talking
dynamic, you
about
see.
the policy language itself, basically, the policy language that
Yeah.
doesn't allow you to, yeah, okay. Yeah. No, that's
Because
not
that doesn't,
getting
you
it.
know, we have the problem with our product as well, picking that up. I was just wondering if you found a way to do it.
No, that's not been the scope of this at all.
Okay,
But thanks to
that's all right.
the input, Vincent.
I can ping you an email with an example of what we have the situation with William Hill, for instance,
Okay.
with their code. So I'll do that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Vincent.
No problem.
Is this currently available somewhere?
Hi, Philip. We're approaching alpha. This is the status. Let me just go back to sharing my screen maybe and go to my last slide where I've got some status information on where we're at with this. So yeah, so we're approaching alpha, meaning that we're close to selecting a few customers to run this in their lab and basically help us also prioritize the coverage for this API. It's not practical for us to release Graphman with support for the infinite possibilities of things you can do. So we're trying to go after some early use cases. So yeah, we're approaching alpha, and we're also seeking input for which entity types that people want to include as part of this type of configuration management. So that's where we are with that. So, if you have input about the way that you organize your configuration, like how would you want to bundle other than the obvious things like per service or per API or per folder. Are there other ways you would like to construct these relationships for bundling? Which entity types of interest, additional staging use cases, which what Vincent was talking about may or may not fall in that category. The types of services you're using right now, we're just focusing on the standard when you create like a web API and policy manager, right? Those types of REST APIs. And just compatibility with your tooling. So that's the kind of input that we're seeking at this point.
Yeah, I'm about to invest time and money on basically managing as code, using GitLab, and moving stuff from development to test to production at the service level. So I don't really want to make a big investment in that, but it sounds like I probably do.
Yeah, it sounds like, maybe you should consider taking a look at the alpha and see if that simplifies your life. It sounds like it would based on your use case.
Otherwise, I've got to do things with GMU and the RESTman API, and I've got to build it all from scratch, which is less than funny.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Philip, if you want to debrief separately and take a look at how you can participate in the alpha, I'd love to follow up with you. Anybody else?
Thank you.
I have a question, not so much for this, but for RESTman in general. When you make, and I don't know if that is a problem that you have in alpha, in this one, is that if you are going, let's say you have a service that needs OTK, OAuth toolkit, right? It has require OAuth to token, OTK OAuth to, and in there are some encapsulated assertions and some fragments that are immutable, right? That they are part of the solution kit, which are immutable. Our challenge at the moment is that if you are going to move this to somewhere else, because of the mappings, unless you put ignore, even a new or existing will create an issue. So you cannot move a service that, let's say, uses certain things, even like just the simple, I want to check what client, if the client is registered in our OTK database, you put that encapsulated assertion. But because of the dependencies, you're including also encapsulated assertions that are, inherent and immutable part of the solution kit. And if you leave all the mapping as usual, which is new or existing, which in theory would mean, if I find it on the other side, I'm not touching it. But somehow RESTman sees it as an update, nevertheless, and makes that move not valid. And
Yeah.
I've seen it fails. It fails the import. And I tried to
Because it's
see
read
how.
only.
Yeah, because it's read only. And the thing is, you could change it, but you would have to go inside and start looking at every single encapsulated assertions and whatever element that is read only, and change that to ignore, and only then you can import it. So did you manage to, which would be quite nicer if new or existing would actually say, oh, it's on the other side, I'm not touching it, and see it
Yeah.
as, you know.
Yes. So currently it's more a creator update approach that we've implemented by default in the Graphman mutations that I was showing you, right? Of course, the ability to explode and implode bundle would make it easy for you to like, you know, say, I don't want to understand how this service works. I just want to create like a bundle with all its dependencies, but then I want to be able to go back and maybe based on some knowledge, you know, exclude certain things. Like for example, if you know, and I haven't actually tested that use case, Maurizio, but that, you know, that's definitely just been added to my list and my mental here. This concept of mutable fragments, you know, but there are different ways you could address that, such as, you know, if you have some areas of conflict that you know are you're going to run into, you could, you know, exploded, delete the subfolder you want, you know, or maybe you could like compare with the dependency on the OTK side and just do a diff and see the difference. Yeah, so far, just so you know, the strategy that by default we're using is creator update. And by default, we're making as you know, like if some objects exist and some don't, it's only going to create what needs to be created on the receiving end. I think you're
Yeah, you're on mute, right? Yeah.
Good thing there is a video. At least you saw that I was on mute. What about if there are any OTK or MAG dependencies which are read-only and thus would fail the import? I guess you are going to look into it, I guess.
Yeah. So you don't have to package those dependencies as part of your import, is what I'm saying, right? So you could exclude that from your bundle, import your bundle without those dependencies. And it's like for anything also that is not part of the current coverage, right? I was saying earlier, you know, maybe we should include JDBC or JMS or these types of configurations to make it possible to bundle them together with your service. So when those dependencies are not bundleable right now, on the receiving end, you know, it's if the dependency is pre-existing, it's going to connect back to it. So that's the idea.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, first of all, there's a couple of questions in the chat. One is around, should we expect any conflict resolution and rollback functionality with a new Graphman and wrapper utilities?
Conflict resolution and rollback functionality with the new Graphman and wrapper utilities. So configuration as code, you know, the way that I'm hoping this works is that if you want to roll back, you're basically applying the previous version of a bundle, right? We haven't identified right now so far the need for like a rollback type of capability, right? You want to roll back specifically that bundle, but rather you would apply the previous version of the bundle, or you know, in the future in ephemeral type gateways, you just throw away the node and or the container image and create a new one with the new version, the older version of the bundle. But it may be possible. It may be the case that we need to look more at some rollback functionality, Barak. Nicholas, do you already support mapping in the current state? No, there's no mapping like you have in like a GMU tool, I think is what you're talking about, where you're mapping values. There's nothing in here to make changes inside policy.
Yeah, no, actually, what I meant was something different. Hi, by the way. What I meant is if you download a bundle in RESTman at the moment, right? What's happening is that you have different XML structures. One is, I think it's resources, and you also have the mappings tag. And the mappings tag you will have for every element or every resource that you want to deploy, you have a mapping element which tells you, okay, if it's sometimes it's fail from new, what you have, if you have, let's say, if you want to deploy a folder, but the folder is not in the root node, right? It's a subfolder somewhere, which means that on the target gateway you need to have that folder, otherwise the deployment will fail. If you are not using GMU, by the way, it's just pure RESTman. And the question is, let's say here, the problem, which is why GMU, for example, exists, is that if you need to make changes there, which is a bit in the use case of what Maurizio talked about before, let's say if you have the OTK, certain assertions, and you say, you know what, do not update them, even if on your source gateway you have a newer version of OTK or something like that, right? Which means that the values and probably IDs and so on will be different. And the question is if Graphman manages those mappings any differently compared to how RESTman does now, because it's always a little bit of tinkering if you need to manually adapt those.
So there is the equivalent concept in Graphman of the mappings that you're talking about. And the other thing about what you said that's evolving on our side is that policy references, which have been using GUIDs, right? I think that's kind of like what you're getting at. The problem that, you know, you have a dependency like OTK, and it uses a solution kit installer that creates, without getting too into the weeds, I think what effectively we're talking about here is the fact that you end up with the same policy dependencies with two different GUIDs between the source and the target environment, right? And the way that Graphman works is it just copies the policy properties of the object on the target that maps the one that is referred to in the bundle, or creates it if it's not there. And our policy language is evolving in a way that we are adding the policy name as a reference when we include different entities. So we're hoping that we can avoid any GUID or GUID mapping, as much as possible. So far, we've been able to do that.
Okay. Okay. I mean, that's one way. Sure. Sorry, I was just, because it's like in day-to-day business, that's really something where you struggle, right? I mean, creating new resources, it's one thing, but updating only certain elements of a bundle, or dealing with certain elements inside a bundle, that's something that customers struggle with. So that's where the question came from. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's Remco.
Remco, I see your suggestion about documentation.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So I think noted. Yeah, I think it's a good comment, right? Real life scenarios with complex real life use cases are certainly something we definitely need to cover, right, when we release this for GA.
Yeah, we want to provide a lot of samples and some, flow examples, but in the samples, right, there's, for example, the OTK authorized endpoint I was showing you elsewhere, right? How to bundle absolutely everything. The rest manipulation of the bundle. Also, we're going to add additional samples, sample queries, sample bundles that you can just, when you get this tool, you can start working with it right away. And some flows, to your point, Remco. Okay, maybe I'll pass it to the next topic. Thanks, guys.
I guess that would be me. Yeah, just a quick intro. My name is Tian Wang. I'm a software engineer here on the Gateway team. So recently, internally, we had a week where the title of this week, where internally we were, I guess, proposing ideas for a customer accelerator week. So ideas to, improve maybe the customer experience with Gateway in a container format. And so the idea that I had, that I was asked to present, is the the ability to read environment variables from policy. So hopefully you're able to see my screen. And I'll jump right into the demo. So locally, I have my gateway here, and surprisingly to me, the gateway does not have the ability to actually read operating system level environment variables. So maybe I can step back a bit. Where the state of this is, it's currently just a prototype. It was 1 week of throw your ideas and see where it lands, sort of. So this is just a sort of in a prototype state. So I have a policy here where just to access environment variables, it's using similar syntaxes as the way we access context variables. So here I'm simply in a template response accessing a list of environment variable names, and below that I'm accessing specific environment variable. So here I'm accessing a variable that I've set on my my laptop here. It's the gateway JDBC URL, the password, and just a variable that that does not exist. So let's see, I think it's services in bars. So I'm hitting the service, throw command to there, and I'm listing all the environment variables on my machine, and I have the JDBC URL and password. So maybe this is a good time to sort of say why this may be useful. And I think one of the big possible benefits is in policy, the idea of if else, then if else, else if then, sort of the nested list or the sequence of if else can start becoming a bit complicated. And if you have like an environment where you have, let's say, a dev1, dev2, and staging n, to have a JDBC configuration for each of those environments sort of makes the policy a bit maybe harder to maintain than it needs to be. So instead, one can just reference the specific configuration for the environment and then point to that JDBC endpoint, I guess. So if I go back and I can echo system here, the JDBC URL. And so in the JDBC connection configuration, one potential scenario is you can have a list of all those JDBC connections for dev1, dev2, for example, staging 1, staging 2. But instead of that, one could have just the JDBC connection reference to environment variables. And so locally, I'm pointing to my gateway database with the attributes of the JDBC connection, and I can connect to it. So I hit test here, it connects. Say, for example, I just change this to some value that does not exist, and it will fail the connection. And so the last thing I want to show here is the usage of that. So we have that JDBC connection. I can use it in a JDBC query assertion. So I point to that JDBC connection. I'm just counting the records in that information table and taking that value, stuffing it into JDBC query context variable, and then displaying it as a count on a template response. So if I just go back to here, So it selects accounts in my local database here. That the record it's 1,088, and so instead of the if else, potentially it could be multiple lines and harder than it should be to maintain. It's just this one JDBC query assertion referencing just the one connection. Yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you. I guess questions?
Yeah, so these environment variables, they are on the actual machine. They are the ones that you can set up by writing env equals like export.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Standard operating system environment variables.
Okay, and then you can reference them through environment dot. Wow.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Will you have like a role for being able to access those variables? Will there be a role where what you need to access that?
Access control. It will be by default. I think all policies. This prototype right now, it's just no restriction.
Okay. Now, just as an input, I think that it's just a thought right now. When I heard that, I was like, oh, maybe that's information that you do not want to give everyone who has access to the gateway. Let's say like a developer, if you have multiple development teams, and it's a bit like I'm just thinking loud here that this might be actually a security relevant topic where you might want to have a role so that the customer can actually choose to not expose those variables to specific individuals.
It
I
could
think
become like a backdoor.
you would need to have a role to configure policy in the gateway, and then that's how that's secured, right? So if you don't have a role to control policy in the gateway, then you can't do, add a reference set variable in the policy in the first place.
That's a good point. Yeah. I guess there may be already some existing. It's definitely something to I guess. I'll just note that down as something to consider. I'm trying to find the ACL here. Yeah, I'm going to the wrong place. Users.
There is a good question in the chat actually from Burak.
So Tian, I think you mentioned having a whitelist, right? Such that you don't get access to everything, and that's configurable, or that would be one of the potential ways to mitigate any kind of risk of that, right?
That's right. Yeah, a whitelist that takes maybe a prefix or a regex, as you mentioned, Gary. That would blanket, filter any environment variable names that you don't want to access. And maybe that's slightly different than role-based, where you can, depending on your role, access everything. But yeah, definitely, a whitelist is sort of one of the ideas. Sorry, somebody mentioned there is chat. Maybe I have to stop sharing my screen to see the chat.
I can read those for you if you like. So the first question is the environment variable going to be a new gateway entity and will be able to manage access permissions like others? If not, how the admins operators are going to make sure the sensitive information is protected? For example, the SSG admin password exposes an administrator password in some of our Helm chart deployments.
Yeah, similar topic. It's not a new entity currently. It will be, I guess, potentially limited by a whitelist, which is not implemented yet. So whether it's a whitelist based on the name of the environment variable, so let's say we only allow access to variables with name that starts with SSG or something like that, and then you can only access those. So you can control if you only ones that you really want to access specifically. So SSG, JDBC connection, URL, like that.
So there's some security around this. Again, yeah, I guess as Tian mentioned, this is a prototype, right? It's a very initial 1 week worth of quick prototyping done, right? There's definitely some security aspects of this that we need to consider. I guess, Tian, there's another question here, like saying, would this be different than using a cluster-wide property? I think this would be better than environmental variables. So maybe if you could kind of highlight the advantages of the environment variable versus cluster-wide property, maybe kind of clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So typically, I guess in a sort of a, let's say, platform like Kubernetes, that platform knows how to, by default works with environment variables and sets up, all its configuration to environment variables. If we want to access those things, we actually have to create script or code to copy those values into context variables and then access them through context variables. And that's possible too. So by directly accessing environment variables, you sort of skip that intermediate script or step where you don't have to maintain that anymore. So I can see where, let's say there's a new variable you want to copy over, then you have to modify your script, or maybe your script is just copy star over, do that too. But this is sort of directly referenced. I think today we just copy the environment variables we're interested in into context variables, and we access them through context variables.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I guess another comment, just kind of agreeing with the whitelist approach. And then another question, sorry for the extra questions, but is the environment going to be passed at the start of the JVM, or are we going to have them online, meaning they will be evaluated at runtime?
Just at start, yeah. So it's just the nature of environment variables. When the Java process starts up, that's the snapshot of the values that are taken. And yeah, I was thinking about ways to maybe try to change that at runtime, but it sort of violates a lot of the ideas of environment variables and capturing it at the start of a process. But yeah, right now it's just the snapshot at the start of the JVM process or the Java process, the gateway Java process.
All right, thanks. That's all the questions so far. All right, anyone else have any other questions?
Greg, do you want to open it up for general Q&A?
Yep, sounds like a good idea. Anyone have any other questions about any other topics?
I have one. I've got customers asking about the VMware takeover. Do you have any news on that?
Yeah, I think there's nothing more we can say other than what's been publicly said at this point. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We really can't say anything else other than there is no deal at this point. So until there is a deal, there's really nothing to comment on. So apologize, but that's as far as we can go until there's actually a deal.
Let's just hope it didn't happen this way, same way as everything happened from CA to Broadcom when everybody left the sinking ship.
I don't know if folks have seen sort of, I just showed up on my news feed this morning, sort of the president of the Broadcom software group posted a blog update or something like that. It's on the Broadcom website. It's just sort of more about what they're planning to do. But it's a sort of a public blog or article.
Okay, yeah, good to know. Yeah, so yeah, definitely folks can check that out. And yeah, again, that's all we'd be able to share at this point for sure. There is another question in the chat. Says, we, RDW, are deploying the container gateway to Azure, but our security manager wants secrets in Azure Key Vaults in production. When will the Kubernetes secret store CSI driver for the container version be supported?
I'll take that one. Hey, so at the moment, we currently do have an integration for the secret store CSI driver. There was an after sales that we did on that, I think, a few months ago. That currently supports additional additional volume mounts. The problem with supporting that for some of the gateways core configuration, like the SSG admin username password, is that those are environment variables, and the secret store CSI driver mounts things as files. So that could be something that we look at. Basically, we would have to have an additional way to load the file once it's on the actual machine itself. So that's definitely something that we'll look into. In terms of the way that you'd like to use it, is that specifically for all of the gateway secrets, or are there particular things that you want to load from a key management system?
Like, is it keys or certs or passwords or?
Yeah, so the gateway has I would say probably five things that we currently store as a standard secret in Kubernetes. So 5 items by default would be the gateway admin username, gateway admin password, and then JDBC information. We also have environment variables for the default SSL cert. But if you're going behind, like most customers in Kubernetes that I've spoken to, go through an English controller, so the default SSL key and setting that becomes less important as as kind of a bootstrap step. But yeah, I think there's four variables, and then additional bundles, additional configuration can be loaded through the CSI driver. Yeah, so Kubernetes secrets, password store, and private keys. So yeah, the default SSL key. We do currently have an internal POC that kind of deals with grabbing something from vaults. So not Azure. So not Azure. That doesn't work with the the secret store CSI driver though. In terms of key store, those are probably going to be stored in insert key format, and so we'd have to convert that to a P12 for the gateway to actually, or a P12 or a PFX identity file for the gateway to understand it. For the password store, I guess if you're referring to stored passwords, then technically you can store the bundle file on a KMS, so a bundle file that contains stored passwords on a KMS, and you can have that loaded into the gateway when it starts up through Bootstrap, and that would be loading that secret from the relevant vault as a file that then gets picked up by the gateway at runtime or boot. There's also additional sort of, I guess, investigation that we're doing into supporting things like HashiCorp Vault at an application level, which might be a better place for some of this. Given that if you're looking at relying on an external source of truth for your secrets, then you're probably going to want to be able to dynamically update that. So using a CSI driver is going to give you those secrets when the gateway boots, but it's going to be less useful from an application runtime perspective if those values change for whatever reason. Right. And I guess, sorry, just to add, we'll look more into the default gateway secret from a CSI driver perspective. It is something that I plan to look more into, but it's a bit trickier than just loading bundles in. So on what term will this be available? So in terms of availability, So any updates for that would be made to the gateway Helm chart. So I can't give a specific timeline on that. In terms of Azure support, I can't give a timeline on that either. We do have an internal POC that's built in policy for Vault that would allow you to grab credentials from Vault and use them for backend systems. That's not an assertion on the gateway, it's just policy. So I think it would also be worth taking a look at the Azure API for the Azure KMS API and seeing if there's some information that you can grab from that. And that's also something that we'll be looking into for some of the cloud vendor KMS solutions out there as well. I don't have any timelines on that at the moment.
Thanks, Gary. We have a few minutes left. Anyone else have any additional questions?
While the group is thinking about it, let me chime in with a couple of activities that are upcoming just so that you're aware of them. First of all, thank you guys for coming to June's office hours. July's office hours will be July 21st. We hope to see you there. Also in July, Layer7 is a global silver sponsor for API Days. The first one we'll be attending is in New York. So if you're on the Eastern Seaboard, we encourage you to come visit us and have a chat with us, as well as listen to Francois, the first speaker today, talk about Friends Don't Let Friends Centralize Authorization Enforcement. It's a very interesting discussion that he'll be having. And also on the 27th, I should have said New York is 27th and 28th. On the 27th, we'll also be doing an API Academy workshop in conjunction with API Days. We'll also be doing, for those of you who are in Europe, we'll be doing London in October and Paris in December. And we'll be doing Melbourne in September for those of you who happen to be in the Pacific Rim. And with that, I'll open it back up to questions.
Actually, I have one point which is only part of a question. Something that I encountered in terms of, you want to deploy or you want to grab a service, right? And that service is let's say a SOAP service, for example. I mean, SOAP is, I'm not sure how much SOAP we will encounter in the next years, but one thing that I find is that in terms of dependencies, a dependency usually will link, for example, a schema that you validate, right? Which is the main schema of that WSDL file, for example. And one thing that I find is that, and I'm not sure about this, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have in that schema, you have import tags, which means you're importing other XSDs, which are, let's say, referenced by a schema location. They are not actually listed as a dependency. And just, well, it's kind of a question more than a thought. Is it possible to include those as dependencies in Graphman? Just as a thought / question. Which you probably cannot answer right now. It's just, like I said, just a thought that I just had, because it's something that I'm continue to encounter where we're like, okay, we need to make sure that we have all the references of those schemas, because if you forget one, the whole structure doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Francois had a drop. I will definitely send him a note on this to see if that's something he's considered or if that would help. But yeah, I don't know that anyone has a direct answer for you around the call, but I'll definitely pass it by him for consideration.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Right, anything else?
Well, if there's no other questions, this recording will be available in about an hour on Communities and via social. And again, thank you guys for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.